It's 738 Sundays since the man in 10 Downing Street was not a Conservative. Could this Sunday be, in Taylor Swift's words, the last time? Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are singing from the same song sheet and they're advising, don't bet on it, it's not over yet. Sunak came out fighting in their debate this week, but he's weighed down by the legacy of Johnson and Trust. Just can't seem to shake it off. Keir Starmer told a rally yesterday that he's ready for it, but he reminded them Labour has formed. In 1970, 1987, 1992, the party snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. We'll speak to the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. This could be the last Sunday he gets to use that title for a while. We're joined by Labour's consigliere, Pat McFadden. He's the man running this election campaign for the party. Reform leader Nigel Farage will be live in the studio. Is he the one who will turn a defeat into a catastrophe for the Conservatives? And is this the week when the SNP gets knocked off their perch? We'll speak to party leader John Swinney. Plus, with us throughout the show, two former Downing Street directors of communications on opposite sides of the political divide. Alistair Campbell was at Tony Blair's side when Labour last went from opposition into government. And Craig Oliver worked for David Cameron, who took over when they were kicked out a decade later. And alongside them all morning, we'll have the broadcaster and journalist, Daisy McAndrew. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. 4 days to go. Our election campaign may not offer the drama of the Le Pen surge in France or the sheer mind-boggling surrealism of America's contest, but it does matter. And how we talk to and about each other also matters. This week we've seen activists bringing an ugly dollop of bigotry to their campaigning, caught out using racist and homophobic language. Well, this is hardly new news. We can go all the way back to the general election of 1964, exactly 60 years ago, when a candidate won the Smethwick seat with a slogan I'm not going to repeat on air, but which sounds like, if you want a Tigger for a neighbour, vote Labour. This presents a dilemma for broadcasters. On the one hand, we need to report and debate what is said in plain language. On the other, we don't want to upset people unnecessarily. Personally, I dislike the use of euphemisms such as the N-word or the P-word, which I think simply trivialise the hostile intent. I prefer to call a spade, as the Prime Minister did this week. In our family, we protect our children not by hiding them from the reality of the world, but preparing them for a world in which such words are still, regrettably, commonplace. They understand from the get-go that the person with the problem is not them, but the racist. All that said, out of courtesy to some colleagues who feel differently and who may be distressed by the use of such words, we'll do our best to avoid them today. I'm joined now by the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. Good morning, Deputy Prime Minister. We'll be talking a little later to the man who wants to be the angel of death for your kind of conservatism, Nigel Farage. Now, you've told the Sunday Times this morning that you're gravely concerned about Russian influence boosting the reform campaign. Are you saying that Putin is backing Farage?
Well, this is something that I've warned about for some time. Indeed, I was at a Defending Democracy Summit in Korea earlier in the year, meeting with leaders from around the world to discuss exactly this. There is a threat in all elections, and indeed we see it in this election, from hostile state actors seeking to influence the outcome of the election campaign. Russia is a prime example of this, and this is a classic example from the Russian playbook. Now, what I would say is that this is relatively typical low-level stuff, the use of bots, but we have stood up the election cell in the Cabinet Office. We did that at the very beginning of the campaign, and it was designed to look into exactly this sort of thing. And I think that your viewers, it should just be a salutary reminder for all of us, when you engage on social media, are these people that you think are posting stuff, are they real or are they bots generated by hostile state actors? It's something we all need to be aware of.
I'll ask him directly later on, but do you think that Mr Farage is aware of this, approves of it, cares about it?
I have absolutely no idea. Those are all questions for Nigel Farage to answer. By the way, I'm not remotely suggesting there's some sort of direct collusion between the two of them. What I am warning about is the threat of
we know he admires Putin.
Russian state interference in our elections. And when it comes to Nigel Farage's comments in relation to Ukraine, I'm deeply concerned by the fact that he chose to use the old narrative of somehow that the EU or someone else was responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Only Russia was responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the terrible effects that is having on the people of Ukraine right now as bombs rain down on them. And there's a fight between democracy and freedom going on there. And we should be absolutely clear whose side we're on.
According to the polls, most of the people who say they intend to vote for reform voted for your party, the Conservatives, in 2019. What can you say to those people to bring them back?
Well, it's very simple, that at the election on Thursday, there are only two people that can walk through the door of 10 Downing Street, Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. Now, Rishi Sunak has a plan to cut people's taxes, to control migration, to protect our green belt. The alternative is Keir Starmer, who has a plan that will involve putting up people's taxes, whether you're a pensioner paying tax on your basic state pension, whether you're a first-time buyer paying tax on your first home, and plans that will involve less control of migration and building on our green belt, as you saw on the front page of the Sunday Times today.
I've got the campaign thing, but let's just think about the politics of this. Last time round, Nigel Farage backed off his challenge to the Tories in 2019. He decided not to put up candidates where he thought the Tories were going to win. He's probably watching now. Try and persuade him to spare the Conservative Party from a humiliating defeat.
Well, I'm not in the business of persuading any of my political opponents. I'm in the business of persuading...
He can help you.
Trevor, I'm in the business of persuading people to vote for the Conservative Party. And why I would say people should vote for the Conservative Party is we've started to turn the economy around. Inflation was 11%, now it's 2%. As we get inflation under control, we're cutting people's taxes, we're controlling migration. All of those things will be put at risk by the only other person who can walk through the door of 10 Downing Street, Keir Starmer. If you want to stop Keir Starmer walking through the doors of 10 Downing Street, the only way you can stop it is to vote for your Conservative candidate. I do genuinely understand people's frustrations, but in the end, you've got to, in this last week, it's the choice, Labour or Conservative. To stop Labour getting in, you have to vote Conservative. Well,
that's not quite right, is it? Because a lot of the people who you do want to vote Conservative, who voted Conservative before, are now with Mr Farage. Now, OK, let me ask you this. You've heard some of the language, some of the things that have been said by reform activists and volunteers, which some Mr Farage has now disowned. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm deeply saddened by some of this language, and particularly the language that you alluded to at the top of the programme. I grew up in the 1980s, and I thought the use of the P word was long behind us. And actually, I've been quite heartened by the fact that political parties from across the spectrum have come together to condemn the hurt not just felt by the Prime Minister, but felt by the Prime Minister's family as well. And I think it's right that we should all come together and call out the use of that deplorable language.
But you could, I guess, find some way of reaching out to reform. I mean, the truth of the matter is the centre-right has been split. That is what's going to give Labour, if the polls are to be believed, a big majority. Is it too late now to unite the Conservative family? Well,
I think the way that you unite the Conservative family is for voters. And I understand, genuinely, I have many conversations with voters whose the pen is sort of proverbially hovering over which box to put the cross in. If you're worried, and so many voters I speak to are genuinely worried about what Labour will do to their taxes, whether they're a pensioner or a first-time buyer. They're worried about what Labour will do to the Green Belt. The only way, if you share our Conservative values of cutting taxes, of controlling migration, it's only by voting Conservative that you can stop Labour getting in. And what I would say is just think in 6 months' time how you're going to feel. I have a strong feeling the shine is going to come off Labour pretty quickly. Buyer's remorse will set in, and the bigger the Labour majority, the bigger the buyer's remorse. Everyone still has it in their hands to stop that by making sure they vote Conservative to stop that happening.
When you say to stop that, do you mean that you still think that you can win, or do you mean preventing what Grant Shapps called a supermajority? What is your aim now?
My aim is to make sure that we win an overall majority. Of course it is. That's the best possible outcome for this country, is for the Conservatives to have an overall majority. What I'm saying to people there is I do understand their frustrations, and that they need to just don't think about the anger just now, right at this moment. Think also about how this country is going to be in 6 months, a year's time, and think carefully about the consequences of voting Labour and how you can stop that happening.
738 weekends you've been in charge. The truth of the matter here is that actually you are not just fighting Labour, but you're fighting your own past. Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. This is a catastrophe that's been, for you, that's been built over many years. And I just wonder, let me ask you a question about that. Why haven't you deployed Boris Johnson, who proved to be your most effective weapon against Farage in 2019? Where is he?
Well, Boris, I think, has already been sending videos and supporting candidates. But I would take, but Trevor, I would take issue.
He's effective,
I'm afraid I'm
out on the street.
I'm not going to accept the premise of your question. Actually, if you look at the record since 2010, when we came to office, unemployment was a huge problem. Since then, 4 million jobs have been created, record low unemployment. We had low standards of maths and literacy. Now we have the highest reading standards in the Western world. So we have got a record of which we can be proud. Now, of course, after 14 years in office, you don't get everything right, and I understand people's frustrations. But ultimately, this isn't about the past. This is about the future of the country in the next 5 years. And I would urge people to think about how they will feel in 6 months' time, in a year's time, if Labour are in power, if they're putting up people's taxes, imposing those regulations. It remains in people's hands to stop it.
I know you want to turn your fire on Labour, but actually a large part of this is about the Conservative Party and conservatism. As I said, it is your 738th weekend in charge. How does it feel to be essentially on the eve of destruction for your party? Because that's what every signal tells us.
Well, I would say in an election campaign, you can have commentators, and you're an interviewer and probably a commentator, Trevor, and you can have participants. I'm a participant, and my job, whether it's on the doorstep or in this television studio, speaking to you and to your viewers at home, is to make the case for the Conservative Party and to warn, mark my words, dogs bark, cats meow, Labour put up taxes. Don't take that risk. It's in your hands. We have a clear plan to control migration, to start to reduce taxes. The game is on. The fight is on. Now is the time for people to make up their minds about the future of our country.
Liz Truss essentially made the party of sound money into the party of market chaos, and Boris Johnson made the party of law and order and party of lawbreakers. It's really striking that in this interview, you just seem to refuse to accept that you're carrying that burden. Well, the D-Day, the gambling, the rain also. I mean, actually, it's been a mess.
Well, Trevor, I thought I'd say this at the beginning. I accept people's frustrations. And of course, having been in power... I'm not talking about people's frustrations, I'm talking about your failures. Having been in power for 14 years, of course, we haven't got everything right. I totally accept that, and apologies have been made for various things that you've mentioned there. But fundamentally, now this is a choice about where we go as a country for the future. I'm very proud of many of the things we've achieved in government, not least unemployment, education standards and so on, but now this is about what happens over the next 5 years. And in these last few days, I think that the choice between our two parties is becoming much, much clearer. And in my experience, people are starting to turn their mind to that choice. Some
people say that, let's say, if you were unfortunate enough to lose this election, that what the Tories need is a period of stability under a steady, moderate, experienced leader. David Cameron sat in that chair a few weeks back, said he's going back to his shepherd's hut. Kemi Badenoch, some people think, could start a fight in an empty room. You're very popular amongst those who say they want calm and tranquility. Would you be up for it?
Well, all these stories, I guarantee you, Trevor, are total and utter nonsense. There's only one thing that I'm focused on, and that is making sure we have an overall majority for the Conservative Party to fight for every single vote.
OK. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Right, we are heading into the final week of the election campaign. What Alex Ferguson might have called squeaky bum time. I don't know what you're all going to be doing on Thursday night. Here's what I'm going to be up to.
Behind that door.
Well, what are you hearing?
A summer election, July 4th of July.
We will be live.
Inflation, the cost of living crisis.
He's repeatedly said
It's projected to go higher.
absolutely certainly.
Now is the moment.
The optics, the decision, the gamble.
All of that will be in play.
The question, of course, is...
Are you happy he's called an election?
Let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by two former Downing Street Directors of Communications on the opposite side of the political divide, Alistair Campbell and Craig Oliver, along with the broadcaster and journalist Daisy McAndrew. Well, the Deputy Prime Minister there was pretty clear, not engaging anything to do with the past. He is absolutely focused on squeezing reform. It's interesting, this story now, they're aiming at reform, Daisy.
Yeah, they've clearly got their sights set, which obviously tells its own story. If you're not attacking the people who are your number one opponent, but you're attacking the people who might destroy your future, you're looking to after the election. You're not looking to the election. You're looking to the chaos that will happen when you are in opposition, when you have lost. And it's an interesting tactic because obviously subtly tells everybody that you know you're going to lose, which we all know anyway, but it's not something politicians normally admit. And B, it shows that this is where the fight is going to happen, which, again, we've been predicting, but it concentrates minds and says, well, that is, as you were saying, that's what's going to happen to the rump of what's left of the right. That's the fight that's going to happen, and that's the man you're most worried about.
Craig, one thing which it's puzzled me, and I've talked to every Conservative spokesperson every week. Why are they so reluctant to disown the Johnson and Truss legacies, which is, without question, the thing that's weighing them down?
To be honest, I don't know. I think that one of the things that Rishi Sunak should have done as soon as he came in as Prime Minister was do exactly that. And I think he's probably regretting not having done that. I suppose there was a residual worry that they were going to alienate some people. Party management's been a huge problem, but I think he needed to take it by the scruff of the neck and say, look, I'm in charge now and things are going to be different.
I mean, I think the one chance Rishi Sunak had was when he became Prime Minister and he talked about professionalism, accountability, integrity. He then had to show it, and the only way to show it was to admit the truth that everybody in the country knows, that Johnson and Truss have been the two worst Prime Ministers in our lifetime, probably in our history, and yet they've never done that. And also on this, I still think to this day they're not handling Farage properly. They're first of all, it was, vote Farage, get Starmer. They're still trying to play that. They're not really attacking Farage for who he is and what he represents, because they're still trying to get the people that are voting Farage to come back to them. So what they've done, I think it's been bad politics. I think it's been a lack of leadership. I still refuse to accept that this election is all over. I think this is Labour's big challenge and big worry. I was out canvassing in Rushcliffe and in Newark yesterday. And there is still a lot of people saying, I just can't make my mind up. They clearly don't want the Tories back. But an awful lot of people are saying, I just don't know what I'm going to vote. And I think for Labour to get the mandate that they need, the next few days, for me, have got to be about making sure nobody fails to understand what the change that they're talking about represents. So, I know you've got Farage coming in, and I think Farage has clearly broken through in this campaign. But ultimately, the one thing I agree with what Oliver Dowden says, the only two people who can be Prime Minister are Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. That is the battle in the next few days for Labour.
But Alistair, surely the reason so many, and I completely agree with you that more people than any election I can remember are undecided at such a late stage. That is a concern for the Labour Party. But that has to be the fault of the Labour Party and of the campaign that they've been running, because people just aren't turned on by it. They're turned off by the Tories, that's clear, but they're not turned on by the Labour Party.
It feels to me like this campaign has been a referendum on the Conservative Party, and clearly the answer to that is no, we don't want them, but we have not really seen a very, very positive, energised campaign on the other side. I think Alistair's absolutely right. I saw one of your graphics earlier, which was saying that Labour's on 40.5% of the vote. I think if they dip below 40 and get a majority of 200, lots of people are going to be saying, hang on a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean,
it's really quite annoying that our graphs have now become so well known that you guys are coming in and queuing them instead of me. I mean, so I just leave the studio.
Well, I thought you were going to show that one too, and I like the tax and borrowing one as well. Can we see that one as well?
Yeah,
Trevor?
we'll come to that later on.
No, but I think what's interesting. So the polls fundamentally have not shifted insofar as Labour and the Tories are concerned.
Or the gap has not shifted.
The gap's not shifted. There's one, I think, in the Telegraph today where Labour are down a bit. Reform, I think, it's interesting. Reform seemed to me, I think Reform have gone down in recent days. I think the Ukraine stuff has damaged Farage. I think this racism stuff has damaged Farage. And I was picking up that up yesterday, by the way. I was getting people who were saying, I was going to vote Reform, now I don't think we're going to vote. Or, interestingly, one or two, I was going to vote Reform, but I think I'll probably give Labour a go. And that's what I mean about it's still very volatile out there. I reckon I knocked on about hundreds of doors yesterday, and I would say definitely more Labour than anything else, without a doubt. Lots of Lib Dems who were onto the fact that, is this going to be a wasted vote? But then just lots of people saying, I'm really confused, I really can't work it out.
There's a general point here which we've been tracking, which is the combined Labour and Conservative vote, which is now down at around about 60%. Yeah. In the past 4 or 5 decades, typically it's hovered around 80, 75%. It is quite striking that's fallen, which we interpret that as a loss of faith in politics generally. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't this be the thing that most alarms us?
It certainly will be very alarming to the two main parties. Obviously, it's manna from heaven to the smaller parties. And people have been saying, I mean, back in the 90s, when I used to work for Charles Kennedy, he was always talking about how people are much more promiscuous, are beginning to be much more promiscuous with their vote. They're not sticking faithfully to how their father or mother voted, which was the way that most of us were brought up. And I think that is indicative. It's also indicative of the chaos that there has been and people just saying, I don't want anything to do with those two.
And I think that the key word that you're using there is volatility. It's 5 years ago since the Conservatives won what was supposed to be a majority that was going to see Boris Johnson in Parliament for at least 2 terms. And that just fell apart almost immediately. Keir Starmer's done a brilliant job turning the Labour Party around, making them electable from having a revolutionary socialist in charge to having a centrist politician. But that sense of volatility and that sense of if you haven't told people what you're going to do, if you haven't brought them along with you, is a problem. And I'm nervous about that for the next Parliament because I just think that, as you say, people just are very loose and very willing to switch very quickly.
I tell you what, the other thing I found interesting yesterday, the one argument which I felt really worked with people who were sort of leaning towards Labour but not quite sure, and they were saying, I don't know what they're going to do about this, I don't know what they're going to do about that, and actually explaining to them that the point Craig just made, Keir Starmer has done a remarkable thing to take Labour from where it was to where it is, and just imagine if he were able to do the same sort of thing with the country. And in a sense, you're playing into this sense that he does what he needs to do to meet the challenges before him at the time, which he's kind of done all his life. But I still think, though, for the next 4 days, I've not seen your interview with Pat. I know you recorded that, but I think for the next 4 days, it's got to be about hope, optimism. You've got to give people a tune to whistle to as they walk to the polling station with real delight in saying, yes, I'm going to get rid of this terrible government, but I also want this government to come in.
Can we come back to what Oliver Dowden was saying? Because I think one of the important questions, whatever the outcome on Thursday, is what's the future of the centre-right? And no doubt we'll talk about this again after we've talked to Nigel Farage. But the tradition that Oliver Dowden represents, the one nation, consensual, mainstream Toryism, seems to be under attack right across the Western world. Tonight we will see results coming in from France. We guess, we don't know, but we guess that the Marine Le Pen's basically nativist party will make tremendous strides forward. We've seen this happened in Italy. We're seeing it in Sweden, which used to be the Social Democrats' dream. What is happening to conservatism, Claire?
Can I just be...
Craig?
Can I be slightly pedantic? You use the word centre-right. I think the centre-right and populist right. And I think that I would identify with being part of a Cameroon sort of centrist right. I don't think that there is a huge amount in common with that and Nigel Farage and what's currently going on in France and Germany and other countries. It's a populist right movement. I think that politics...
But Rishi Sunak hasn't made that separation.
Sure. I think he needs to do that. And I think that politics does abhor a vacuum, just as nature abhors a vacuum. And I think that the problem is that there hasn't been enough calling it out, and there hasn't been enough definition, not just from the Conservative Party, but also from the Labour Party in terms of what are you going to do, how are we going to solve this problem, how are we actually going to move forward. And I think that when there is that vacuum, which both sides have been guilty of, then people like Farage are allowed to walk in and do what they've said. Now, I'm optimistic that in the last few days, the racism and homophobia stuff has shone through, the Putin nonsense has been called out too. So hopefully that will have an effect. But it isn't centre-right.
But where do those voters go? I think that's the post-Brexit, the idea was meant to be once Brexit was done, everybody who was in that sort of Brexity camp, either in the Tory party or other parties that supported Brexit, would all come together and be one right-wing party. And it hasn't happened, and it's going to be fascinating to see. And you can see why Rishi Sunak and other Conservative governments were trying to keep that side of their supporters on side, because when you look at the popularity of those individual politicians, those ones, whether it's the Bravermans or the Priti Patels or the Farages, within the sort of particularly Tory grassroots, were much more popular at one point in the last couple of years than the centrist Tories were.
But therein lies the problem, because the Johnson and Truss in particular, were the choice of activists. They were the people that, whereas the public sort of see through them completely. And even today, Oliver Dowden couldn't bring himself to say the truth about Boris Johnson.
But Johnson is still quite popular
I don't believe
with
that
the
at all.
public. Well, if you look at the polls, that's what the polls say.
Well, we've done a poll on our podcast every week, and Truss and Johnson and Sunak are the three least popular politicians in the country.
Alistair, the Conservative spokespeople have an interest this week in basically dumping on reform. If I can ask you for a moment to extract yourself a little bit from the tribe and think about this as a political operative, can you see a situation in which there is some relationship, some alliance, some relationship between the people who are now flocking to reform and traditional
before
Conservatives?
Thursday?
Not before Thursday, but after Thursday.
100%. Absolutely, I can see that. And I think it would be a terrible mistake for the Conservative Party. But if you look at the sort of Conservatives who are probably going to lose, and you look at the ones who maybe won't lose, I think you're going to get more who won't lose, who are going to be leaning into that sort of, a Farageist Conservative Party. I think that will be... I think that's death for the Conservative Party.
There's a big debate about that, and we could go into that. Look, I hope in your interview, this is the Nigel Farage show, isn't it? When he's around, reform...
But
Farage does well, doesn't he? When he's around and when he's been with UKIP, the Brexit Party, and reform, it boosts. Have a real go at him, because he's a nasty piece of work, and he's got lots of problems, and I think that needs to happen. And frankly, the Conservative
Party... And he never talks about policies.
I think he will... I will promise you, Craig, I will put that to him, and he'll answer it himself. It is almost 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. The Deputy Prime Minister's told this programme that Russia is interfering in the general election campaign. Speaking about allegations regarding Reform UK, he also said that all parties should come together and call out the use of deplorable language. Well, there's still a lot to stick around for this morning. Shortly, we'll hear from Labour's National Campaign Coordinator, Pat McFadden, and the leader of the Reform UK party, Nigel Farage. Plus, the Scottish First Minister and SNP leader, John Swinney. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Labour's election coordinator, Pat McFadden. Pat McFadden, if you win a majority this Thursday, are you going to express your gratitude to Nigel Farage for dividing the right in politics so successfully?
I'm assuming nothing about the result on Thursday. I think Labour has a chance, has a good possibility this time, but change will only come if people vote for it. And there's huge uncertainty still in these polls. There's a lot of difference between them. And I don't want anyone to think that the outcome of the election is predetermined, because they will all be worth nothing when the voters actually go and vote in person on Thursday. So I'm assuming absolutely nothing about Thursday other than to say we have a real possibility to turn the page on 14 years of the Tories and to start to rebuild.
I understand that that is the proper answer to give, but let's just deal with the actual real situation and the politics, which is that you are in the favourable position you're in because the Conservatives have had so many votes siphoned off to Reform. 90% of Reform voters are former Tory voters. So you will owe something to Nigel Farage.
I don't think we will owe anything to anyone other than the voters themselves who are expressing their opinion in a democratic election. It's an awesome thing. The power is in their hands. There's a real chance for change, and I hope that people will show up. I hope they ignore these polls, to be honest, that they show up and they vote for change and vote Labour on Thursday.
I'm not just saying this just to tease you, though I enjoy doing that. It's about the reality of what happens if you do get elected. It is possible that Labour could end up with more seats than Tony Blair won in 1997 on a lower share of the vote than taken by Jeremy Corbyn in 2017. Now, is there an issue here about the legitimacy, potentially, of a Labour government? And the problem for you there is that you'll have no money, as Rachel Reeves keeps pointing out. Isn't there potentially a problem for you here, that you become a government with essentially a poor mandate?
Well, look, in our system, in most elections in the past generation, people have won majorities on whatever percentage of the vote, and I don't recall those majorities being challenged. So I don't know what the share of the vote will be on Thursday, but I do know that in the British system, the government is formed by the party that wins a majority of seats. And let's not underestimate this. My party's existence goes back over 100 years. Only three times in the past 100 years has Labour managed to win a majority from opposition. So I'm making no predictions about Thursday, but I'm saying if it was a fourth time, that would be a real historic achievement. And I think all this stuff about slicing and dicing the vote underestimates the credit due to Keir Starmer for changing the Labour Party and putting us in a position where this is even a possibility. Well, because 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of people didn't think it was.
Indeed, that's true. Well, let's talk about that, the credit due to Keir Starmer. And again, this is not simply being devil's advocate and trying to explore the problem that a Labour government might face. Let's just take a look at this. Here are the ratings for leaders coming in from opposition. Thatcher, Cameron, Blair all got elected with positive ratings for them. Keir Starmer, negative ratings. Now, this is not necessarily a comment on him, so it's simply the point is that you will have very little political credit, very little room for manoeuvre, no money. Isn't that going to be a serious problem for Labour if you were elected?
Look, if anybody wanted an easy life, I would advise them not to sign up to try to be in government. And it is a responsibility. And there are plenty of difficult decisions coming to us. But I do believe in the possibilities of change. I do think liberating the government of the country from the obsessions of various right-wing Tory factions and actually having a government that turns up asking, how do we grow the economy today? How do we get NHS waiting lists down? How do we crack down on antisocial behaviour? How do we employ more teachers in our schools? These are differences worth having. It's a good agenda to be getting on with. And we are ready if the voters give us that responsibility on Thursday.
All right, well, let's talk about policy. Your big thing is change. Gordon Brown yesterday called for more action from Labour on child poverty. And this is a classic Labour cause. You are keeping the two-child cap on benefits. Yet you can afford to guarantee the triple lock for pensioners, which costs a multiple of that. You've already made a choice to satisfy older, wealthier pensioners, not to attack child poverty. You've made a choice already, haven't you?
Well, I don't think the only way to tackle child poverty is through that single change, but there's a really important point in what you've raised. I could give you lots of challenges for the country. Child poverty is one. There are many others. Our local authorities have very little money. There's lots of challenges facing the country. And what they all add up to is a legacy that we will inherit of 14 years of the Conservatives, where the economy has been too weak. No, but this is important.
Is that you've already...
I acknowledge the challenges facing us. The point is to begin. The point is to make a start.
And the question is, the nature of the start you made, and my point is that you have a choice. You have a choice here, and you have made a choice not to tackle child poverty, but to reward people who are, frankly, well off. Right now, it is twice as likely, if you're a child, you're twice as likely to be living in poverty as a pensioner. Is that the right priority for a Labour government?
The priority for a Labour government is growth. And the trouble with these conversations, and I've had lots of these interviews during the course of this campaign about the government budget. Should you spend £1 or £2 billion more on this or £1 or £2 billion more on that? Is none of it escapes the doom loop that we've been in recent years. The truth is, we've had a lot of discussion about the government budget or this policy, but it's a really important point. We have not discussed enough the actual wealth of the country and the struggle that households of all kinds of incomes and range have. And unless we change that, this discussion about government budget won't get us out of it. So we've put that question at the centre of our manifesto and the centre of the campaign.
If I may say so,
we've done it for good reason.
If I may say so, you are swerving the question. You've got enough money to reward rich old people like me. You could use that money to alleviate child poverty, and you have made a choice already.
I don't accept that, because I don't accept that the only way to alleviate child poverty is through one single change. This is going to be a cause dear to our hearts. Right. We've said so in the manifesto. But with all these causes, and this is a really important point, unless we grow the economy, unless we get stronger, unless we make Britain a better place to invest,
but you keep telling
unless we grow this.
But what you keep telling me is if there's more money, you can do all sorts of things.
Will not make the difference.
I'm not yelling at you about growth. I'm just saying you've got money, you could make a choice. But Rachel Reeves and Bridget Phillipson have both been in here telling me about breakfast clubs and how the children could thrive more if they have breakfast. You could have chosen to spend money on free lunches, but you didn't. My point here is all of these things are moral choices rather than, let's have more money. And you've already told us or shown us what you're going to do. And it seems to me what you're going to do is not change.
Well, I think putting growth at the heart of the election campaign and asking the question, how do we become a stronger economy, is the biggest change of all, because it's the lack of that has left household incomes in the UK thousands of pounds a year behind similar families in France or Germany or the Netherlands, and thousands of pounds a year behind what it would have been if we'd kept up with the Labour rate of growth. If we had kept up with the rate of growth that we had most of the time we were in power, the economy today would be £150 billion larger. We'd have tens of billion pounds more for public services. You cannot escape.
I hear all that, and you and your colleagues come in every week and you say, growth will be the answer to everything. I'm not even testing that. I'm simply saying you've got a bunch of money, you know it's there, and you've already decided that you want to do this rather than that. And my point to you is that actually your slogan of change isn't actually change. You are still rewarding the same people that the Conservatives have done for the 14 years you complained about.
It would be real and worthwhile change if you're looking to buy a house for the first time to know that the government of the day was going to put economic stability first in order to grow the economy. It would be real and worthwhile change to know that you had 40,000 more appointments every week in the NHS for people on waiting lists. Real and worthwhile change to have 6,500 more qualified teachers in our schools. Real and worthwhile change for any community affected by antisocial behaviour to know that community policing is coming back with 13,000 more officers and PCSOs. There are policies, there are first steps, they're at the heart of our manifesto. They are real and worthwhile change, and they're change worth voting for on Thursday, Trevor.
Yes, I know the campaign slogan. These are ambitions, but the thing is, at every turn, starting from Rachel Reeves saying we're going to follow the Conservative spending plans, what you've done is follow the same path as Conservatives. Wasn't the Green leader, Carla Denyer, right to say that, yeah, you've changed into Tories?
Carla will not be faced with these questions. And I believe that the purpose of politics is not to display your radicalism in opposition by racking up a big shopping list. Frankly, anyone can do that. The purpose of politics is to make real and worthwhile change in power. And if we are trusted by the electorate on Thursday, that's what we want to do.
All right, let me ask you to do something that costs you nothing. Would you like to wish the England team good luck tonight?
Of course.
You said that with such enthusiasm.
Of course.
Pat McFadden, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pat McFadden.
Shall I tell you what he really thinks?
Go on then.
No.
OK, yeah, that was a classic Pat McFadden interview. Anyway, we're back with Alistair Campbell, Daisy McAndrew and Craig Oliver. Very swiftly. Alistair, classic McFadden, overly cautious?
I think that a big part of their strategy has been reassurance, and that was a very reassuring interview. And I've got to say, look, Pat, in 1997, Pat's job was essentially working for me, rewriting press releases. He is a class act. He's always been a class act. And I think what you got there was a sense of, yeah, that he got the policies in that Labour will implement. He talked about the first steps. But I think they are still on this position. They know that for a lot of people, the doubts about Labour relate to the fact that just a few years ago, Jeremy Corbyn was in charge. He was just constantly talking about the change that Labour will be.
The problem with being reassuring is it's the other side of boring. And, and you were just saying before the break earlier about how you were hoping the last few days would be full of hope and rainbows and glitter.
That was hope, Pat McFadden style. Pat is never going to be the guy who's out there getting your heart racing.
The issue is, can you tell the difference between Pat McFadden and a rain cloud? But here's the issue, actually, very quickly. OK, we don't have that, but there is that graphic which we showed Pat about Starmer's popularity. It's going to be an albatross.
I think that is an issue. It is. I think it should be worrying to them that he's already in negative territory. That only goes one way, or traditionally has only gone one way for a Prime Minister. But look, that was not an interview where there was a concrete example of something that's going to make a real material difference. It's still a lot of assertions. Ambition is the word you say. And a few days out, I'm a bit concerned about that. I would like to hear the next government of this country start putting some real flesh on the bone, and they're just not.
You're accepting it is the next government. We're going to come back to all of this a little later. Coming up, we'll speak live to the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
I'm Mark Stone, I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, DC. And beyond the United States, from across the world, I report on the biggest stories.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I remember some of the worst of the violence here.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Now to the man who could be more responsible than any other individual for putting Sir Keir Starmer into Downing Street. Good morning,
You've got
Mr.
to
Farage.
laugh, haven't you? You've got to laugh, Trevor. You follow this narrative that all the media follow. Let's get it straight. We've had 14 years of Conservative government, a mega majority in 2019, which I significantly helped them to obtain. Millions of those voters...
I've made that point this morning, by the way.
...utterly betrayed. If I'd stayed at home, if I'd gone to the Bahamas fishing for the month, Keir Starmer would have won a big majority anyway. And many of our voters, if they're polled and spoken to, if we weren't here, wouldn't vote for anybody.
Is there any chance I could ask you a question?
Go on then.
Right. Let's start with the unambiguously racist remarks made by one of your own volunteers, Andrew Parker. Now, you said this is a setup.
I know it is.
Do you have a single shred of proof?
Well, I'll tell you who he is. He's an actor, OK, number one.
All sorts of people are actors. That's not proof that this was a setup. Have you got any proof?
He's an actor with a rather well-spoken actor, but he has an alter ego. He does what he calls rough speaking, all right? I was there working in the office in Essex when he turned up, and he was, from the moment he walked through the room, like a version of Alf Garnett. Now, I didn't know this was an act. It was an act from the start to the end. He spent time with the two Channel 4 undercover reporters in the office. In fact, he spent most of the morning with them. He then said, I've got a big car. He took canvassers out with Channel 4 in the car with him. He tried to get our canvassers to say nasty racist things, which of course they did not. And then he comes out with this, and literally Alf Garnett stream, including all mosques should be turned into Wetherspoons. This was an act from start to finish. It was a deliberate attempt to derail our campaign.
I've let you explain yourself. There's a number of things in that. There's not actually anything in that says that you know that this was a setup. But what I think is even more interesting is...
Well, hang on.
Let me finish my question. You just said the guy came in and he was a walking Alf Garnett.
In accent terms.
Yeah.
In accent term. He didn't say anything offensive to me at all. It was only when he'd got a couple of our canvases in the car with Channel 4 filming that he tried to provoke them. He also, by the way, specialises, his services online include undercover filming.
But you still don't have any proof that actually he wasn't genuinely a guy who decided he wanted to support you.
Well, if you wanted to support us, why not come as the person you really are? Why come using your false acting voice?
Quite a lot of the people who support you come as they really are. There's the guy who described gay people as degenerates. The one who talked about using migrants in small boats as target practice.
Well, that's the same guy.
People who reposted anti-Semitic comments.
That's the same guy. Well, hang on.
How many of you had to disown so far?
A few. I inherited...
What's a few? 2, 6,
no,
100?
It's perhaps a dozen, something like that. Look, Trevor, you know me well enough. We've known each other 20 years. You know that I fought harder than anyone to drive the BNP out as an electoral force, and I did so with...
I've got a bone to pick with you about that, but we'll come back to that later.
Success. When I ran UKIP for all those years, and when I set the Brexit Party up, didn't allow anybody to even be a member who'd been part of one of those groups. Now, I have inherited a start-up. I've not even been doing this a month, and I've got some people there I'd rather weren't there, and they won't be after next Thursday at all.
As you say, we've known each other a long time. Let me just get to the root of this problem. Of course, you can't know the background of everybody who walks into the office, but do you ever ask yourself this question? In the words of the immortal Mrs. Merton, what was it about you, Nigel Farage, that first attracted these racists and homophobes and anti-Semites to your party?
Well, the candidates that we're kicking out, of course, came when I wasn't there. Is the first point to make. Second point to make. There is an irony.
Your party, you own it. They knew it's your party.
No.
So to answer my question,
I have been honorary president.
About you
I've not
that
been
attracted
active.
them?
Ironically, destroying the BNP means people who are minded that way don't any longer have a home to go to, and so some will gravitate in our direction. And as soon as we find out who they are, they'll be gone. And by the way,
and why do you think that is?
And by the way.
Finish your point. Why do you think that is? Why do they think that you are the person who's going to give them a home?
They don't.
Well, they do. They join your party.
But they're looking for a home. Just as on the left, communists join the Labour Party. Where else are they going to go? Maybe George Galloway now. I don't know. But, you know, this whole issue, remember, I led 29 MEPs into the European Parliament 5 years ago. It was the most diverse group from any country in Europe. And today, we've got the big rally, 5,000 people coming to Birmingham today. Who is the star of the show going to be? Well, it's going to be Zia Youssef, a practicing Muslim, who is going to say things about the growth of Muslim extremism, about racism in Britain. And I can assure you, anybody who has a racist point of view, I don't want to know them.
All right. What about people who think Vladimir Putin is a really good guy?
The Russia hoax. The Russia hoax.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. Brexit won in the referendum. It must be the Russians. We had to put up with 3 years of being told we've been funded by the Russians until Aaron Banks...
Nobody's saying you're funded by the Russians.
Until Aaron Banks finally won a court
Nobody's saying you're funded by the Russians.
In this case, I understand why the Labour and Conservative parties are worried. I was opposed to the Iraq war. I thought it was absolutely crazy to go into Libya.
No, but let me stop.
And 10 years ago, I stood up in the European Parliament and I said, you are giving a dangerous man an excuse to give his people to go to war. I said, there will be a war in Ukraine. Who else do you know that predicted it?
You're once again You're once again answering your own question. My question to you is, are you aware that these bots, probably Russian-inspired, are interfering in the election? The Deputy Prime Minister is talking cobblers.
I mean, you had this bland fellow on earlier, who apparently is the Deputy Prime Minister, who no one knows who he is. And there he is saying, oh, there are Russian bots involved. Hang on, did you ask him how many millions of pounds his party have taken from Russian sources
No.
over the course of the last few years.
You can't keep doing this.
This is the Russia hoax.
You can't keep asking yourself a question and answering it.
Can I be clear? Vladimir Putin is a very, very dangerous, but dangerously clever man. I abhor what he's done in Ukraine, totally and utterly.
All right.
But I was far-sighted. I saw this coming.
All right, let me ask you really a sort of a serious, substantial question. You are friends and allies with Donald Trump. Does he share your view that the West is largely to blame for Vladimir Putin's invasion?
No, but Henry Kissinger does, and many other very senior figures.
Dead.
Yes, Henry Kissinger warned about this all the way through the 90s, the noughties, and onwards. Look, we are where we are. The fact that I got it right all those years ago and everybody else got it wrong, it, frankly, doesn't matter. We are where we are. And I'll tell you why I like Donald Trump, above all. This was the man that signed the Abraham Accords, got Israel and Arab states to start working closely together. This was the man who had the guts to cross the line and go into North Korea. This was the first president in 5 not to launch a foreign war. And I think, and this, by the way, there's no debate in this general election about foreign policy whatsoever, other than the attempt to smear me.
All right.
I think the world's in a very dangerous place.
Nobody's smearing you, Nigel.
Well, they're accusing me of supporting Vladimir Putin, and you virtually are too.
Let's just talk about the thing that I think most interests you, which is the future of the right. If you win your seat on Thursday, you're going to spend the next 5 years tormenting the Tories. You've promised them that.
No, replacing them.
OK, well, actually, that's the point.
Replacing them.
Is your aim to join up with them or to destroy? Is this a merger or a murder?
No, they have destroyed themselves. They're only being held together by an electoral system. And by the way, this time next Sunday, you will be discussing how unfit for purpose absolute first past the post is, I promise you, because Labour are going to win a vast number of seats on not a very big share of the vote. And you'll probably find people like us with many, many, many millions of votes will win seats, but nowhere near as many, perhaps, as we deserve. We have, now I've been back a month. It's a month tomorrow that I've been back doing this, all right? We've built up, we've now got 60,000 people paying me 25 quid. We've got a mailing list, whatever 200. What I'm going to do, not just in Parliament, but out in the country more importantly, we're going to build a mass movement for real change.
OK. Well, look, this mass movement, I want to ask you about its character. As you said, we've known each other a while, and I want to put this to you personally, so give me a moment to explain it.
Sure.
I know intuitively when somebody doesn't like me because of my colour. That's not you.
No.
I don't think you care much about those things. But actually, I wonder if you're doing something worse than that. You have a political project, which is to destroy Conservative and all of that.
No. It's a positive project.
Yeah. No, you've got a project. And you're prepared to use any means at all, including fanning the flames of prejudice, to advance that project, which is why you will turn a blind eye to people who use words like Paki, people who talk about gay people as degenerate.
That is totally and utterly untrue. You damn well know, having known me for 20 years.
My point is, not what's in your... my point is not what's in your mind, it is what you are doing.
Well, say that after today, right, when we launch the biggest donor to our campaign and the new star of our party, and you'll see a lot of this man in politics. Say that to Zia next week.
You're going to tell me you've got a nation donor. Yeah. That's not my point. My point is that the Reform project is a purely cynical project, which is prepared to turn a blind eye to prejudices of its supporters who come in off the road into the office with their Afghanistan-style things, and you don't mind that because you've got this bigger project in your mind,
and
without caring what it is doing to the sense of politics and the tenor of politics in this country. That's the accusation.
I wonder how many Labour supporters and Conservative supporters share
not talking to them, I'm
similar
talking about you.
Views. No, but that's the point, isn't it? That's the point. You singled me out for this.
Yep.
You wouldn't ask... By the way, this Alf Garnett figure said he was a member of the Conservative Party, so perhaps you better ask Oliver Dowden next time about that. Political parties attract all sorts of people. I always think politics brings out the best and the worst in people. And I'm not fanning the flames of anything. I want unity in this country. I am worried that through diversity, through inclusion, through all these agendas that are being pushed, our schools, critical race theory, we're not bringing people together with this, we're dividing people. I want to live, Trevor, in a country that is literally colourblind. I couldn't care less what colour you are. I'm not interested in what sexuality you have. Let's treat everybody equally. That is my agenda.
Are you still in the place where you said to me several years ago that you would get rid of anti-discrimination legislation because you think it's divisive?
Very. Terrible. Awful. And what we're doing in our schools, telling young white kids...
Seriously?
What we're doing in our schools, telling young white kids they're oppressors and young black kids they're victims, is truly dreadful.
Let me just finally ask you this. I'm going to put this as politely as I can because as you say, we've known each other. Yep. We treat each other with respect. Do you ever think that you are inviting people with evil and malign intent, with a nod and a wink, to come under your banner because you have this bigger cause, but what they want to do is essentially get rid of people like me?
Do you know how many people in this country genuinely have malign intent? It's minute. It's absolutely minute. Let's stop being so horrible.
What?
Let's stop being so horrible about the people of this country. We are the most decent people on earth, and I won't hear other.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much.
Thank
we will
you.
no doubt carry on this conversation. Before we go to the break, I have to apologise for the use of that word, PAKI, which should not be used on Sky News. After the break, I'm going to be joined by SNP leader John Swinney. If the polls are right, this is going to be a change election in Scotland too. For the first time in more than a decade, the SNP looks likely to finish second behind Labour. The SNP leader, John Swinney, joins us now. Good morning, Mr. Swinney.
Morning, Trevor.
Can we just start with a very urgent issue? We understand that because Scotland's school holidays have begun, there will be people who will have left to go abroad before their postal ballots have arrived. How serious an issue is this for you?
It is a serious issue, Trevor. I warned when the election was called that it was going to take place during the Scottish school summer holidays, and many of our schools broke up for the summer break during last week, some of them as early as Wednesday. And we've had significant reports of people who were planning to vote by post, who had applied properly for a postal vote before the deadline of the 19th of June. And those postal ballots have not arrived with people, and some of them have now left the country, and they have been disenfranchised because of the timing of the election, which is something I deeply regret. And I warned about when the Prime Minister took the decision to have the election during the school holidays. I welcome the fact that a number of local authorities in Scotland have taken emergency measures to establish centres which could enable people to exercise their postal vote if it has not arrived by post already. And I've made it very clear my concern about the fact that some people will be disenfranchised because of these arrangements.
Well, there will be people who are able to watch Sky News from abroad. Do you have any advice for them if they're in that situation?
There is, if they're out of the country, unfortunately, there is nothing that can be done. They have to be here to be able to exercise their postal vote if it's been delivered to their house, or if there is an alternative arrangement in place. There are no other proxy arrangements that can be put in place at such a late date. But I think it's illustrative of the fact that when this election was called, there was no thought given to the fact that it would take place during the Scottish summer school holidays.
All right, let's talk about the current political situation. Every poll in Scotland suggests that you, from a party that dominated Scottish politics, have essentially lost the confidence of the Scottish people. What went wrong?
We've had a bit of a tough time, Trevor. We've talked this through before, and I came into the leadership of the SNP about 7 weeks ago and became First Minister to essentially strengthen the party and to build our relationship with the electorate. I recognise we've got work to do in that respect. I've started doing that. We are in a stronger position in the polls than we were when I came into office, and we are building that trust as a unified and cohesive political party. And it's unified and cohesive political parties that win elections, and that's what we're aiming to do.
Well, you're unified, and you may be unified around a position which rather emphasises why people may be drifting away from you. Is your position still that if you win half of the Westminster seats, which would now be 29 of them, that you will consider that as a mandate to press again for a further independence referendum, and that you would put that as your top priority as a Scottish government?
Well, independence is relevant to the daily lives of people in Scotland. That's my fundamental point in this election, Trevor, because the issues that people are concerned about in Scotland today, the cost of living crisis, the cuts in our public services and cut in our public spending, the implications of Brexit, these are all decisions that were arrived at Westminster. And if Scotland was an independent country, we could take a different course.
Well, there was a referendum. There's a referendum in Scotland. There's a referendum in Scotland, which your previous leader described as a once-in-a-generation referendum. A generation, in my book, is rather more than 10 years.
But lots of things have changed since 2014, Trevor, not least of which the fact that in the independence referendum in 2014, people in Scotland were told, if you want to guarantee your membership of the European Union, you've got to vote against independence. And we lost our European membership, despite the wishes of the people of Scotland to remain part of the European Union. Now, that decision is now having a very severe economic is doing severe economic damage to the Scottish economy. Our economy is smaller as a consequence, as is the UK economy, and Brexit has been an unmitigated disaster for the United Kingdom. And so that's a very significant change in circumstances that I believe alone merits the right of the people of Scotland to decide their own future.
But Mr Swinney, one of the things that doesn't seem to change is that almost everything that goes wrong in Scotland comes back to something that Westminster's done wrong, and the solution is independence. Whereas you actually have the power in your own hands to change some things right now, irrespective of independence, for Scottish people. For example, right now, a person earning more than £28,850 in Scotland pays more tax than they would if they lived in England. You can fix that. You don't have to wait for independence. You don't have to come to Westminster. Why don't you concentrate on fixing the things you can fix rather than going back into the independence issue?
Well, we do address issues in Scotland, and the point you've put to me about tax, we took a decision to increase tax on higher earners so we could invest more in our National Health Service, more than was allocated to us through the UK government.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you there for a second? Because, forgive me one second, for where I live, are you saying that £28,850 defines a higher earner? I mean, that's a nurse.
That's the tax bracket.
That's a junior teacher. That's a junior police officer.
Yeah, and nurses and junior police officers and teachers will be paid significantly more in Scotland because of the pay deals that we've negotiated to make sure these individuals have higher salaries than they have of your neighbours who are living in England. They also have access to a greater level of early learning and childcare for their 3- and 4-year-old children. Their children who go to university will not pay tuition fees. They will have access to free personal care for their elderly relatives. Young people under 22 will have free bus travel. So yes, people will be paying on higher earnings slightly more in taxation in Scotland than in England, but they will get a substantial number of greater services that are provided by the Scottish Government that better meet their needs than in other parts of the United Kingdom.
But if I may
That's
say
what
so,
we
you're
call
not
the
really
social contract.
You're not really responding to my point, which is, could the Scottish Government remedy what you accepted was, you called it a tough time, but a loss of confidence in the Scottish electorate by doing better, being in a situation where you're not, for example, axing 450 teachers in Glasgow, where your waiting lists aren't at a record high, where the legendary Calmac ferry actually gets built. It's been delayed yet again. Aren't these the things that people in Scotland really can worry about, rather than yet another go round the independence merry-go-round?
Well, I set out for you a moment ago, Trevor, a whole range of areas where the Scottish Government is delivering advantages and benefits to people in Scotland, like the doubling of early learning and childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds and some 2-year-olds, so that children get the best start in life. The fact that our young people more of our young people from deprived communities are able to go to university, or the fact that young people go to university without paying tuition fees, or the fact that our young people are educated in much higher quality school infrastructure and buildings than was the case when we came to office. Now, the fact that we've got an accident emergency system that's been the best performing in the United Kingdom for nine years. So I could go through all those areas where we're delivering. But one of the challenges is that we're facing the impact of austerity. And that austerity will carry on under a Labour government because they've accepted the fiscal rules of the Conservatives. And that will do damage to Scottish public services.
Mr Swinney, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Back with our panel next.
This exhibition left Ukraine in November of 2022, in the midst of the war, when Kyiv was constantly bombarded. And our idea was to show this art to European public, and at the same time to take it out of harm waste. That was a very complicated operation, I have to tell you, because we made a mistake, because we thought that we are very smart. Russians were bombing Kyiv every week on Monday, and we decided that we will go on Tuesday. And of course, that Tuesday was the most intensive bombardment of the whole Ukrainian territory. Fortunately, our trucks left Kyiv before this bombardment started. By the end of the day, they reached Polish border. We were ready to open champagne. And in this moment, some straight rocket exploded at the Polish territory. You remember probably that incident, and everybody decided that it's the beginning of the Third World War. Poles closed the border, and our trucks stayed on the border. So it was unbelievable diplomatic effort. Ukrainian diplomats worked telephones. Fortunately, nobody slept in Poland on that night. And in the morning, Polish authorities just flagged our trucks to Polish territory, and they reached Madrid on time. We started in Madrid, then this exhibition came to Cologne, then to the Royal Museum of Fine Arts in Brussels, then to Vienna. In Vienna, it was enlarged 2 times. Then we divided this exhibition. It's made chronologically, so we created know-how of exhibition which could be, you know, separated or attached together. And one part of it, we opened exhibition last week in the National Gallery of Slovakia, and this week people could see it in London. It's covering the first half of the 20th century, from the beginning to 1930s.
Back with our panel, Alistair Campbell, Daisy McAndrew and Craig Oliver. Daisy, Nigel Farage. I always feel, after I talk to Nigel Farage, the main struggle is to stop him interviewing himself. What do you make of it?
I thought there were elements of the interview that were fascinating. He was trying to throw some shade onto various issues that you were trying to bring up. Obviously, this issue of whether or not his party's been infiltrated by actors who are pretending to be racist, or whether his party is actually full of racists, is one of the core issues that you were trying to tackle him on. He was adamant that this was an actor acting rather than somebody who happens to be an actor being a racist. I'm not sure we got anywhere nearer the truth. And some of the issues that you picked him up on about, you know, whether or not the country needs race rules and regulations, and him saying, well, that's something that causes more problems than it helps. I did find quite alarming.
I mean, I just think that I had a little chat with him beforehand, and the thing about Nigel Farage, you describe it as interviewing himself. He's a very, 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 very effective communicator.
Yeah.
That's what he's good at. What I found really frustrating in the last few weeks is that he's never really pinned on policy. I mean, that so-called contract with the people is just dreadful in terms of the damage it would do to the country. And yet the Conservatives don't attack him on it. Labour don't attack him on it because, you know, Labour actually need reform to do quite well in certain parts of the country to...
I want to come back to this point.
To get Tories over there. And I just think that if... Look, I've spoken to both the Labour candidate and the Tory candidate in Clacton. They're getting some horrific sort of abuse. And this sort of politics, as you pointed out to him, attracts really unpleasant people. And they're not all really unpleasant, but, you know, really unpleasant people are drawn to it. And because he does the cheeky chappy stuff and he does the kind of, hail fellow, well met, and some of my best friends are black and that kind of stuff, he can present himself in a certain way, while, as you were rightly, I think, said, attracts really bad people who want really bad things to happen in this country. And I agree with Daisy, when you push him on something like the policy, I mean, the idea that our children are taught that, they're bad and all black people are good and victims, it's just nonsense.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too far, because, in fact, we've discussed that with Richard Tice previously. But I think, Craig...
Richard Tice, who Farage blames for all the problems.
It threw him under the bus.
I mean, threw him right under the bus.
But the thing interesting in Craig is, whatever people say about him, he has an outsized impact. I mean, extraordinary impact for an individual in British politics.
That's certainly true. I mean, look, what I think, having looked at all the interviews today, is we've seen each of the parties try to make their closing argument. The Labour Party has been trying to say, look, you've got to vote for change, turn out and vote for change. The Conservative Party, don't give them a supermajority, effectively admitting they're going to lose, but make it tighter than it possibly could be. I thought with watching you interview Nigel Farage is he was struggling to get away from this constant accusation, look, you are a party that attracts racists, homophobes and people who like
the
Putin.
Mrs. Merton problem.
Yeah, I mean, he has a real problem with that. And I do think that for all of the sort of stuff about him being an effective communicator, which undoubtedly is, he's managed to insert himself in politics. I think he feels uncomfortable on this. I think the Putin stuff has harmed him. He was shot up, and that was a real problem for him. And I think that the race stuff also has harmed him. And I do think that there was that area where he did say, look, all of this attempts to have diversity and inclusion in the country is problematic and that we should just get rid of all the race laws and that sort of stuff. I mean, that's just overt. That is explicit.
There is a problem, though, which we're all slightly falling into the trap of. By constantly saying your party attracts bad people, you are offending the good people who do support him, who are fed up with, who have every reason, and it's understandable why they're fed up with the Tory party, why they might not be convinced by Labour Party, why they might think that a Lib Dem or a Green is a wasted vote. And so by banging on about the racists in this party, you're offending them.
No, there's something that is a bit of a rerun of the Brexit thing.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I find very frustrating about Nigel Farage, he never, ever gets pinned on his role in Brexit. He was very dismissive about that stuff in Russia. And actually, my beef with Oliver Dowden is you never spoke up against this when it was happening in the Brexit referendum. And by the way, on Russia, I'd forgotten until Nick Robinson told me the other day. It was an interview that I did with Nigel Farage for GQ back in 2014 or something, where he made these comments about Putin. They bore no relation to what he said. He was out there saying, this guy is about the best leader around.
We could talk endlessly about Nigel Farage. In fact, I could have had another half hour with him, but I wouldn't have the pleasure of talking to you, because I want to talk about not just about his impact on the Tories, or more generally, but actually there's an issue for Labour, isn't there, Alistair? You actually said Labour need him to continue doing well and keep the Tories divided. How do they do that?
Well, no, look, there is. I think one of the reasons why Labour have maybe not really been going for reform is because, as I say, although they'll be taking some votes off Labour, but not many. They're basically taking votes off the Conservatives. So that electorally might help Labour. But I think Farage is probably going to get elected. One or two others may get elected. And because he does have this ability to dominate the media narrative wherever he goes, though I think you'll find it harder in Parliament. I think you'll find Parliament a very, very frustrating place. He won't get called much. He won't be able to swan off to America every weekend and pretend that he's Donald Trump's best friend. I think but Labour, I think, have got to, if they get into government, one, they've got genuinely to deliver, which is going to be hard. Two, I really think they've got to start calling this out, because if they don't, they're going to see what has happened in Germany and France, where this thing has been allowed to grow and grow and grow because people play to it rather than challenge it.
Part of the problem with Nigel Farage is, the easy answers to complex problems, and he's been getting away with it for years. But I think if we're honest, in this campaign, it's all about campaigning. We're all talking about campaigning. Exactly. We're not talking about governing. And that's what's been deeply frustrating about this campaign. The whole campaign has suggested that there might be easy answers to complex problems. We've seen the Conservative Party struggling to defend its record. We've seen the Labour Party saying next to nothing in terms of what it's actually going to do. And I think that one of the problems that we have is actually exactly as Alistair says, you have got to call these people out. Otherwise, we'll be sitting here at the next election saying, oh, hasn't Nigel Farage has a disproportionate impact on politics?
By the way, I think he's right about PR. I think next week PR will be on the agenda.
Yeah.
Because if you have Labour getting a massive majority with fewer votes than Corbyn, Lib Dems doing really well with fewer votes than Charles Kennedy, Nick Clegg, and Reform getting millions of votes but a few seats, people are going to go, oh, hold on a minute.
It is a matter of weekly frustration that, you know, we try to put these questions to them. They have their schooled answers. We can't get them to talk about social care. We can't get them to talk really about housing. Can't get them to talk about planning. And actually, what Paul Johnson of the IFS described as a conspiracy of silence, I think has enveloped...
Bring back the morning press conferences, I say.
Oh, God.
No, seriously.
That
used to get stuff.
We might come to the morning press conference in a second, because I've got something to show you. But before we get to that, as you know, we love a graph here. Here is a new thing that you won't have seen.
I saw this.
Here is the...
I have seen it.
Here is the UK's voting intention by alcoholic drink preference. Conservatives.
I reckon the Greens have got a few sherry drinkers.
Sherry drinkers. I mean, that's the one demographic that the Conservatives are still leading on.
Yeah, it's good.
So actually,
Good.
Can we see the others? Let's see what Shandy. Here are the Shandy drinkers. Labour, a bit dilute.
Yeah, but what's whiskey? Okay. Oh, that's got to be SNP.
I'd love to get the champagne drinkers up, but I don't think I'm not sure that we've got champagne drinkers.
We haven't got the champagne
I
socialists.
saw Prosecco.
But apparently we do have champagne drinkers.
Everything's laid on for the media, but has the careful planning and the absence of problems taken the sparkle out of following Labour's leader?
No, I think it certainly suits us because it's all laid on. It's easy. The plane's there, the bus is there to take you from the plane. You know at the start of the day where you're going to be at a certain time. You know when you can file.
Oh, my Lord.
That was me interviewing you in 1987 when the Labour Party gave us champagne breakfasts.
Oh, my Lord. And daily press conferences.
We don't have that sort of thing at Sky. We are Spartan. We are tough. That is it for this week's show. I'll be back next Sunday. We'll have a new government and we'll see who's there. See you on Thursday night, by the way, all night with Beth and Kay.
Thank you.